Well, Jeff, thanks so much for making time to do this. For those who don't know, what you need to know about Jeff Klimkowski is not just that he was the CFO, he is the CFO of Dude Wipes, but that he's been preparing for this role since I think freshman year of high school when he would make his sister drive him to school so he could read the Wall Street Journal in the car, is my understanding of our previous conversations, because Jeff had his eyes set on becoming an investment banker from a wee age as a teenager, and he was able to do that. Went to Indiana University at Kelly, got a great job at Deutsche Bank, and was on his way to being a master of the universe. But having friends derailed him, and he had some childhood buddies, Sean Riley and Ryan Megan, and together they started Dude Wipes back in the day, some decade plus ago. And then at some point, Jeff was kind of put to a decision of I continue down the iBanking track to, managing director and, all of what his original childhood dream was, or do I pursue a different dream with my childhood friends? And then lo and behold, I think you made the right call. I believe you think so as well too, but you'll tell us. So that's who we have here. Dude Wipes is the category king of flushable wipes. They crossed the $200 million of gross retail revenue last year. I cannot wait to hear when they announce what they're going to do this year, because the number's up and to the right, I am sure. And they are not only saving the world one butt at a time, they are also leading the world the way in terms of how does Jeff lead the CFO in the finance function. And the finance function is probably one of the areas of the C-suite that's the most fungible. And so, Jeff, please feel free to chime in on anything about your intro that I missed or misdirected on, and tell us the CFO role it's bigger than most people think. Can you give us a little bit of light into that?
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks for having me here. This is awesome. I would love to share this stuff with you all. So yeah, I would say that sums it up. Pretty cool intro. Definitely twists and turns in my career on how I ended up at Dude Wipes. It's funny, you think you're doing one thing and then you get there and, I got that Deutsche Bank investment banking job. Very happy there, met a lot of great people, but sometimes the universe has different ideas for you. So I do think I made the right decision leaving that job, but that's not to say there wasn't any friction or heartburn over doing it, because I really enjoyed the people that I interacted with and worked with. So a lot of smart people working real hard, and that was pretty cool. But what I would say on the CFO role, I do think it's kind of one of the most misunderstood roles within the C-suite. I would say there's 4 real kind of like verticals that report up at Dude Wipes to the CFO. The first one is everybody gets it. It's the finance and accounting function. So you have to have a good accounting function because you got to report accurate historicals. Lenders use it. It's necessary. And it's how you track your business and how you're performing. And then I would say the finance function, which everybody knows, more forward looking, FP&A, looking at, how do we make investments that are going to help us grow into the future? But then also at Dude Wipes, we have sales strategy, which is basically of our existing products, who do we sell what to? So we determine like the optimum mix to sell to like each channel and each retailer. Whereas my partner, Sean Riley, who I call the best butt wipe salesman in the world, he's out on the front lines with our sales folks, actually selling them and closing them, knocking on doors, building relationships with these retailers. We're helping them establish the story and figure it out. And then supply chain, we always say, we're a bunch of Chicago guys, and the joke around here is there's a lot of big alcohol in the Chicagoland area. And so they always say liquor to lips. We always say wipes to ass. And so in order to get those wipes to somebody's ass, you got to make sure you have enough of them. And when you're growing this much, I would say supply chain is kind of one of the biggest tasks that I've been focused on. And especially because we're creating a category. This is not like soap, like bar soap, where there's enough installed capacity in the United States to meet demand. We are physically putting shovels in the ground, bolting down new machinery in order to meet demand. So right now, demand is outstripping capacity in the United States. And so that's kind of made all of those functions, the finance, sales strategy, and supply chain, very linked together. And right now, supply chain has dictated how fast we can grow. And then the fourth and final, which I think everybody is aware of is legal, falls into my realm. I think when we get to another stage, that's something that will kind of like a chief legal officer or a GC will take off my plate. But right now, um, we got to protect our ass. And so legal rolls up to me, and I use a lot of outside counsel and advice from a lot of smart people. So, but those are kind of like the four functions. And I think everybody thinks of it as kind of like the first one, finance and accounting, and they don't realize the other stuff that you have rolling up to it. And obviously we have a team of very smart people leading each one of those verticals. And so could not do it without them. And they're subsector experts within those.
Well, it's awesome because it sounds like, as you said, like I was when you first texted that, I was like, oh, that's certainly different than I've seen other CFO roles. But given the company and life stage, as you get larger, some of them will become independent functions. But it does seem like you're kind of a CFO, COO hybrid type of a thing, right? Because and that makes total sense. And I was saying, fortunate for the team, the company, you're a co-founder. Otherwise, you have four roles that would normally be four paychecks. But it's all love and grins and upside because you guys are having so much fun. But in each of those roles, before we dive into the AI section, like I mean, you're describing functions that have a different set of business problems that are top of mind for you, I'm sure. They're kind of inherent, as you said, like, the FP&A function. I'm always like, stay out of jail. Yeah. Like that's kind of job number one with that. But then I'm sure there's like for each of them on finance and accounting, supply chain. I mean, I'm reminded of when I first started working with Keurig in 2011, they were like, the CapEx decision is such the hardest one. Each line costs $5 million, takes 9 months to build out. How do I forecast demand so that I know if I'm over or under investing? And they were kind of looking at me I was like, I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you on this side of the S curve, you're better to be wrong early than to be wrong late. I can tell you that for sure, right? But then sales strategy of, making sure you can fulfill that. Retailers at Sean's work hard to give them the green light and the thumbs up, they aren't pissed at you later on after the fact, right? And then, legal, I'm sure. Well, actually, I don't even know. Like, you guys certainly push the edge on the marketing front. Like, I don't know what kind of legal problems that you're worried about with it, but like for each of those four areas, like, what's the business problem or the nightmares or the dreams that you're the most excited about? Just let's start there.
Yeah, I would say, on the legal side, that's easy. Just from like, a lot of it has to do with like contracts and making sure that like we own the IP and we're protected. We use a lot of third party contractors. We're a lean team. And so that's kind of how we built the business. We took, for the first 50 million in revenue, it was just the co-founders running the business and leveraging third parties. And as we've scaled, we've moved away from them and brought people in-house to kind of help us build it. And so a lot of it's contracts and just making sure we own IP, like the boring stuff, as well as with our manufacturer. We have very big, important long-term supply agreements with them. So that's that. And then on the marketing side, we use a lot of influencers and making sure that people are saying the right things and not saying other things that we don't approve of, stay on message. Even though we are risky in terms of like what we say, it's more on the fun side. We just don't want somebody going out there and kind of like going on tangents that are like aligned with our brand equity, which is to, wet cleans better than dry, and so as long as you stay down that lane, you're all good. So
I'm sure there are stories, but
for sure, and having people take stuff down. So, but that's like the less glamorous side. And then on the supply chain, I would say, like you said, Eddie, like with your K cup example, like that is, I would say that's the scariest thing, like right now, because we're investing ahead of demand essentially, and just we are looking 3 years ahead. You were saying 9 months. It takes us 18 months from the time the check's cut to when it's actually producing at like a normalized run rate. So we're looking 3 years ahead and focusing like right now, like we're talking about we just finished up 2027. Now we're talking about 2028 and focusing on that. And, there's big numbers now. Like before it was 2x off of a small base. Now we're growing 50% per annum off of a much larger base. And there's a lot of machines and CapEx that goes into those numbers. And so just kind of locking arms and like understanding like, okay, this is what we're doing. Every year it surprises myself. And that's where like being tied into supply chain and FP&A is like really important. And I think that's why we have a strategic advantage, is because I understand the plan and how it's rolling up to each customer and our major customers. And so I can see this demand. And I actually go to the big line reviews with Sean. I tag along with them. So like I'm in every Walmart and Target meeting, and I can hear from the
which is
buyer's mouth.
atypical.
Yeah.
It's atypical.
Yep. And I can hear from the buyer's mouth like what their long-term strategy is. So it's not just this, salespeople. They're the bullish people on the planet. And thank God for that, because they're selling the dream. And I can see that interaction. And it really, really, like, every year I've been surprised at how much growth we have coming out of the same places. Like when I would have thought, 4 years ago, we'd be fully penetrated in that channel. And now when I look at it and we do these studies about like white space, some of our most penetrated channels are only 30% penetrated. And I would have told you 5 years ago, we would be tapped out, and we're only a third of the way there. And so I'd say that link between FP&A and supply chain and like having that visibility from my perspective and sales strategy on like what we're selling is a strategic advantage within Dude Wipes that like allows me to have the confidence to write those checks 3 years in advance, knowing that that demand is going to come. And this thing is not slowing down. I am more bullish on our business than I have ever been in the history of Dude Wipes. And that's saying something. We've been at this now for, since I know the company was founded in 2011, but we were working on it in 2010, so since 2010. So I have never been more bullish about the future growth than I am now than I was then. So it's a good position and purview.
Well, and I would love to double click further, because what you're describing is forecasting at a high level for across different functions, right? FP&A, you're seeing what the past has done. There is a forecasting element to it for sure. For and the challenge with forecasting the slope and trajectory is relatively easy compared to forecasting timing. And timing is the hard part of the gig as you're describing it, because like, on the supply chain side, in 18 months, that's one thing. The line reviews are, for the next, you tell me, like the next 12 months out. But then at some level, it becomes an interesting exercise of like, kind of like the one we did was like, hey, look, flushable clearly is nowhere near the full size of prize. We can talk about that. But then, between tariffs and the macro and, whatever, like, but I was going to say like, all the news about AI or in the GDP is like the economy would be flat if not for AI capex investments. But I actually now realize it's GPUs and flushable butt wipes. Like those are the two things where demand is way outstripping supply, and you got to invest further with it. But like, how do you actually, obviously you're classically trained, but I'm hearing a lot of gut and intuition coming into it. Like, how do you merge those two in a way that makes you feel good about the NPV and the IRR of the investments that you're making with?
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with experience, just having, seen high growth businesses before in my prior job. Also, I would say building up the intuition confidence is what I like to call it, like talking to other founders that have been there. We had talked to some other folks on the supplement side where they invested and they bought up all of the capacity within their realm to give themselves a 5-year kind of runway when they were category creators within their segment. And so there's a lot of situations that are like that. And then also, like, I would say so there's that intuition. So talking to other people that have been in the situation, experience at my prior job, seeing other case studies where they've invested in this like ahead of the curve. And then also just my experience with Dude Wipes. I've continually been wrong on the downside, like underestimating the growth. And so now it's like that happens enough. You're just like, okay, I understand now where this curve is going to be. And I would say the beauty of our business model, which I think is underestimated, is is really the variable cost structure of Dude Wipes. So yes, CapEx is important, but I would say our biggest, cash need is working capital. And that kind of alleviates itself. So like if I am down wrong, like I guess too high, well, I can do the math to understand like there's going to be a big inflow in working capital and cash that I have tied up into the business that's going to allow us to reposition and, get through that time period. So like having experience navigating through some of those times, like, in 2022, Amazon did a massive destocking, and we were investing ahead of it. And so that was like one of those instances where we had to pull back on marketing spend and stuff for a period of time to kind of reposition. And so the business has been able to do that and navigate those uncharted territories. And I think that's also where another thing we're not a VC pump and dump story. We're a bootstrap company. So, and maybe this is an interesting story to tell readers. Like we tried, like when we were doing, like we went on Shark Tank, we got this investment from Mark Cuban. We thought we had made it. Like, this is awesome. We've got $300,000 in our bank account. Let's go raise more money. Dollar Shave Club was blowing up at the time. And so VC was starting to throw money at these CPG companies. Sean and I took like 20 to 30 VC meetings and we got rejected by every single one of them. And so we were like, what's going on? And the biggest rejection was like, you'll never get guys to use wipes. And we're like, that seems kind of dumb because we're guys and we're using wipes. So like, whatever. So we're like, we got to get profitable. And so in Q4 of 2016, we got profitable, our first quarter ever. And we've been profitable every year ever since. And so I just want to say, like, we've been a profit first company. And so that enables us to take big bets now, that you're talking about is kind of risky. So,
Yeah. That's so important, Jeff, because I the blessing in disguise of, and I'm sure you're much nicer than I think if Christopher was here, you'd be like, I'm sure you have a list of the VCs that have said no and where they are today. But anyway, but like the whole kind of, constraint of not being flush with capital forced you to be bootstrapped and, kind of get default alive on the runway perspective, which is great. Because like there's the obvious genius of the marketing and the brand and just the wipe being bigger, right? Is like, and all of that is, you can see from the outside. What I don't think people fully appreciate is the business model that you've designed, and that there's real magic and secret sauce. What you said about, hey, you've levered the business to be a variable cost lever and not a fixed cost one. You co-manufacture your stuff. You're not building plants out just yet. You have a pretty lean team. I think I shared with you, like, the only company that has higher revenue per FTEs, it might be OnlyFans apparently, or whatever. It's like, it's you guys and them. And so like, you've designed it to be pretty significantly conservative, despite being a very aggressive from the outward perspective on the marketing and front like that. And so like, how did you, and these are choices that you may revisit in the future, but when you say working capital is your biggest risk, but when you're a variable cost, structured business because you've kept it lean, probably one quarter of being wrong the one way, you flush it out in, no pun intended, very shortly, right? I mean, it's not like your risk profile is not one where you've tied up capital the wrong way for years. It's probably months or quarters. Is that a fair way to describe it?
yeah, I would say so, but I would say we are investing CapEx just given the demand that we're seeing within the marketplace. So we are having to put our own dollars in to support the growth over the next 5 years. So that's the nuance. How I think about it is like, we focus on EBITDA, but if I could make any button in the world for a CFO, is I would say make free cash flow button. That is our North Star. I think EBITDA is the most overrated metric on the face of the planet. My job as a CFO is to make long-term investments to generate more free cash flow in the future. And so I only focus on EBITDA to have enough EBITDA so I have free cash flow at the end of my change in working capital, less CapEx equals zero. And that's where we're at today. We are, yeah. Yeah.
No, this is great. Let's go finance nerd on this stuff.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you share. I forget if it was Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett. EBITDA's BS earnings is what he called it, right?
Yes.
And so it sounds like you have some strong opinions about this versus free cash flow. And so, like, talk more about that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Because EBITDA ignores DNA, which is a proxy for CapEx. And so to grow a business and be a category leader, a good business, you're going to need CapEx within the business model. SaaS might be a different category, but they have R&D, so, and that's captured in EBITDA. So maybe that's a little bit different. And so I think if R&D was CapEx, people would be focused on EBIT in the SaaS world. So yes, I'm very much the Warren Buffett type. EBIT would be a much better proxy if we're talking that, but like EBITDA does not encapsulate like what are like the needs of a company long term. And I would say understanding the swings of working capital is the hardest thing to do in CPG, especially high growth, because people assume you're able to just produce when I need product. No, because August and December are two spikes. So I have to start producing in April to meet back to school. And then immediately in September and October, where there's a little lull, I'm going full blown so I can meet the holiday demand. And so it's not, our cash flow is not this perfect linear curve, but our working capital is. And so it's a very different thing where it's a mismatch. And so that's why my goal at the end of the year is how do we maximize EBITDA to work it out to where free cash flow is zero. And so I'm investing in my business, giving Ryan, our CMO and co-founder, enough money to drive demand to where that whole EBITDA is enough to where I can cover my working capital and CapEx needs to have no change in free cash flow. That is my goal.
Perfect. Well, there are two things that come to mind. One is that at some point I had to take over as quote CFO because we didn't have a CFO of Category Pirates, and I told Christopher, like, "Oops, I forgot the free cash flow part of it," and then I'm like, "I don't think my annual spreadsheets work. I think I have to go down to monthly at least to understand what that." So that was kind of a rude awakening for me, as like clearly somebody who's been a spectator and not in the arena long enough. But then when Nielsen had acquired my old firm, the Cambridge Group, Dave Calhoun, who was a dark horse for the top job at GE, went to Blackstone, was CEO of Boeing until all the problems that happened with the 737s, whatnot. But he would say within Nielsen, it was like, show me a business that's generating too much free cash flow, and I'm not excited about it. I want one that is investing aggressively because they know that there's more upside ahead of that. Is that kind of the mindset when you say free cash flow is zero? Because I think that'll be surprising to some folk around.
Yes, absolutely. That's the mindset. And that's how, when you ask the question about how much do you invest in CapEx or working capital or marketing, that's how we get to our answer. And so that's how we know that's the max we can grow in a certain year, because our free cash flow at the end of the year is going to be around zero. And that's how I pace our growth. And so these investments, like right now, we can grow approximately, 50% per annum at zero cash flow, which is, when numbers are getting big, those are starting to get big numbers. And that's what we're targeting every year. And so that's kind of like the algorithm that we look for. And at some point, 10 years down the future, we will have a much bigger free cash flow number, but we're not at that today. And so, yeah, we can invest and grow as fast as we can at this current